Punchbowl's John Bresnahan explains the state of play for guns in the next Congress. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also a CNN contributor and the founder of the Reload.com, where you can head over and sign up for our free weekly newsletter today if you want to keep up to date with what's going on with guns in America from a sober, serious perspective at an outlet that is both independent and informed on the issue, something that is not always the case these days. But yeah, head over to the Reload.com and check out our free newsletter and our membership options today. This week, we are going to be discussing the forming of the new government we're going to be living with here for the next while, especially inside of Congress. We just had the election. We actually still don't have the full election results in, but we have almost everything, and we now have a brand new Republican majority leader. And so we're going to focus on how Congress is shaping up. And to do that, we've got somebody back with us again who is one of the, I think, top reporters on the Hill, frankly, maybe the top reporter on the Hill. And that is Punchbowl co-founder John Bresnahan. Welcome back to the show, John. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, can you tell people just a little bit more about yourself and Punchbowl before we get rolling here?
Sure. I'm a longtime Capitol Hill reporter. I've been I first went to Capitol Hill in 1992. I've been a daily congressional reporter since 1994, so 30 years now. Punchbowl News started, it'll be 4 years in January. Punchbowl, I started with Jake Sherman and Anna Palmer, two of my colleagues. We started it's a subscription newsletter. We've done, knock on wood, we've done really well, and now we feel our coverage of Congress is as good as anybody. And it's punchbowl.news if anybody's interested in reading. We have a free AM newsletter and that comes out at 5 a.m. every morning, around 5 a.m. And then we have a subscription midday and PM newsletter comes out 3 times a day when Congress is in session. So
yeah. Right. And yeah, you guys took, you were some of the best reporters in DC on Congress, and you came together and made your own publication. And, what a novel concept. Have people who have a track record of reporting on something and bring them together to do that specialty. That seems like
I read the Reload also because of the same thing. Here we have an issue expert writing on his issue. So yeah, he's right. So yep.
That's exactly how I feel about Punchbowl.
Analysis and commentary. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I read you guys very, very often. And I think you have some of the best insight out there as far as what's going on in Congress. So let's start with the new majority leader. We had this majority leader election, secret ballot, right?
Right.
A lot riding on this, right? Because McConnell, how long he was
18 years
majority leader? Yeah, 18 years.
He's been the Republican leader, been in majority and minority for 18 years. The longest in history for any Senate leader, either party.
And so this new majority leader, if that's any track record, he's going to be setting the Republican priorities in Congress for, at least in the Senate, for a long time, probably.
We'll see it. So John Thune of South Dakota, who he was going back to the 80s, he was a Senate staffer. He served in the mid 80s, and then he won election to the House in 1996. I actually met him as a freshman member. I remember he and I going out for coffee, 1987. So I've known him since then. He served in the House for a while. Then he got elected to he left Congress and then he got elected to the Senate. He actually beat the then Senate Democratic leader, Tom Daschle, in a huge upset in 2004, knocked off a party leader, which is a huge thing. Now he's currently the minority whip. He's the number 2 Senate Republican, and now he has been elected by his colleagues to replace McConnell, a legendary figure, as the Republican leader. And since they're in the majority, he will be in the majority next year. The majority leader, yeah.
Legendary in DC for sure. Not
Legendary.
as well liked.
Yeah, right. I mean, just
Elsewhere,
really
perhaps.
an iconic figure, like Nancy Pelosi in the House side.
Yes. This is what usually happens with leaders.
McConnell and Pelosi are two just giants in congressional politics for different reasons. There you go.
Oh yeah, and from very different perspectives.
Two best vote counters I've ever seen. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, but that leadership tends to take a lot of the heat from both inside their party and outside.
And it takes the heat. So now Thune will be majority leader. They also have a new majority whip, John Bresnahan of Wyoming, and they have a new number 3 Senate Republican leader. That's Tom Cotton of Arkansas. So all new leadership. Bresnahan was conference chief. He was the number 3 guy. He moved up to number 2, and then Cotton just got elected to the leadership. So there's a new leadership team with a new administration coming in and a new Senate majority. So it's, a lot's changing on the Senate Republican side.
Yeah, absolutely. And Thune, for our purposes here at the Reload, he has, I think it's fair to say, the most pro-gun record of the 3 who were running, because he ran against Texas's John Cornyn, who had been who's been kind of the go-to guy in the Republican caucus on gun legislation, right?
He was for years and years and years and years. Has been for years. Former Texas Attorney General, former Supreme Court Justice in Texas, and had been this. But he was with he worked with Chris Murphy on the gun bill following Uvalde mass shooting.
Yeah, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act.
Right, which was very controversial. The majority of Senate Republicans opposed it, but President Biden
17 voted for it.
Yeah. So, and that was, frankly, the gun issue was one of the things that played in this issue. It played in this election, this internal election, because there were 2 issues that concerned a number of conservatives on Cornyn. One was the gun bill, and another was the CHIPS Act, which is a semiconductor manufacturing bill. It was a huge Democratic priority, huge Biden priority, big price tag. And he voted, he helped put those deals together, and a lot of Senate Republicans a lot of conservatives didn't like that.
Yeah, whereas Thune was opposed to the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act.
He voted no on it, which is a big deal.
And the other candidate who kind of seemed to trail pretty far behind Thune and Cornyn in the voting, at least, was Rick Scott. He was kind of the preferred candidate of a lot of MAGA influencers, although Trump himself didn't really publicly get involved in this.
Which is a big deal, right?
Yeah,
and Scott went for Trump's endorsement, and Trump did not endorse him.
Right. So it says a lot.
It says a lot. Yeah. But a lot of them, Tucker Carlson was for him. Elon Musk was for him. There was a lot of important conservative figures for Scott.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. A lot of the MAGA guys on the outside, not Trump, were pushing for Scott very hard, very aggressively. But Scott also had issues on gun policy as well, right?
He did. He had the red flag law when he was in governor of Florida. He followed the Parkland shooting down there, the school shooting down there. And that's, again, there were gun rights groups had concerns about that legislation. And there were some conservatives who didn't like it. I think that was I don't think the gun issue played as strongly for Scott as it did for Cornyn, because Scott, he was doing it as a governor of a state. But Cornyn, of course, as a longtime Senate leader, it was a very close election. It ended up being Thune only defeated Cornyn by 3 votes. So I think you could make a good argument that, the guns and chips issue that, played. And the thing about leadership elections is they're intensely personal, and members and senators vote on these things for a variety of reasons. The bottom line is, does this help me in some way? If I vote for him or her, does this help me somehow? And how they answer that is up to the member. But I think, going into this, Cornyn had to deal with it. Cornyn has been censured at home by the Texas Republican Party over this issue, over the gun bill. So, fairly or not, this was an issue for some members. I think maybe not as much as the legislation as maybe his judgment, or whether or not he was willing to buck the rest of his party to cut a deal with Democrats. And I think that was, I think there, in an election this close, there's no question these kind of issues played a factor.
Interesting. That's interesting to hear that. I mean, and look, that was
I think it was uphill for him to start. Yeah. And I think that was the guns chips issue was from the start was a problem for him.
Yeah. I mean, that was one of the big bipartisan things that they did under Biden and Cornyn, by virtue of being the guy that most of the caucus would go to on gun policy, ended up being the lead negotiator for that bill. And it got him a lot of grief.
Yeah. In his defense, I mean, look, Uvalde happened in his home state. He felt very strongly personally there. He had visited the site. He visited the school. He met with parents, the victim families. I think, as with gun issues, party lines, people feel very strongly on a personal level about this, about Second Amendment rights, about gun policy, very strongly. And very few people in Congress are neutral on this issue, okay? And I think on this one, and Cornyn has been a hunter. Cornyn is a gun owner. He's talked about that, but he felt, I think in this case, he felt very strongly. And I think with Scott, the same way with the shooting in his home state. I think, and this is oftentimes, this is the complaint you hear from gun rights groups when Congress tries to do something legislatively on guns, because they're reacting to a crisis. They're reacting to an incident. And, what happened after Sandy Hook, right? They try to pass, the universal background check bill. Instead of, have we gone through committee hearings? Have we really reached a reasonable bipartisan issue? It's kind of knee jerk. There's a terrible tragedy, and then Congress acts, and
right. Plus, they're really, even like the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, as an example, it's a compromise in the sense that the gun control advocates didn't get everything they wanted, but it's certainly not an assault weapons ban or universal background checks. It doesn't have those sort of provisions in it. But at the same time, it isn't really like a compromise in the sense that gun control groups got some of what they wanted and gun rights. It really is, it's all one direction on that bill.
I mean, they started the presumption was they were going to get a deal, right? And then they kind of worked backward what they could sell, right? They needed to do something, and that's my point is there's oftentimes, I mean, I go back to, the 90s, the mass shootings in the 90s, and, Congress, child safety locks, all that stuff, and, it's always been an incident. It's never like we start day one, we have a bunch of hearings, this is what we can do. This makes sense. This is borne out by data. This is borne out by precedent. This is borne about what the gun rights community and gun control groups could live with, So I think it's always they're always trying to legislate in a crisis. And I think that's where you get bad legislation or it becomes controversial.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah, for sure. That's always the dynamic at play when these gun bills come through. Okay. And so it's not surprising when, when 17 Republicans break with the gun rights groups to do something like this, that they're going to get backlash. And it happens that Thune is on the side that didn't break.
Right.
And so maybe that helped him here. But, even with, and look, Thune has had you can go through his voting record and the bills he's introduced and how he's voted. He's got a pretty solid record. He voted against, from a gun rights advocate's point of view.
Right.
Obviously, from the gun control advocate point of view, he has a terrible record.
Right.
It just depends on your point of view. But, he's voted against assault weapons bans. He's voted against universal background checks. He's put up himself, co-sponsored national reciprocity for gun carry. That's a top priority of the gun rights movement. He has a pretty strong record on this. There are some gun rights groups that ding him on certain things, but I do wonder if there are things that translate inside the Republican caucus itself. Because, for instance, Gun Owners of America, they had a scorecard, and they dinged him on 2 votes for omnibus legislation that included things like one of them had permanent reauthorization of the Undetectable Firearms Act, which is the one that says you can't possess firearms that could pass through a metal detector without being detected.
Right.
So kind of an old school provision that most of the public isn't even probably aware of, but is something that animates some gun rights activists. But those are the kind of things. Voting for omnibus stuff, does that have any impact inside the caucus itself?
No, because that's, I mean, those are, it depends, those are generally, I mean, they're 2,000-page bills, they cover a variety of issues, they might cover hundreds of issues. So, I'm not sure which omnibus you're talking about that was included in, I don't know, maybe there was funding for South Dakota in it, there's a lot of ways, you're right.
I mean, it was one of the recent ones where, where it's sort of I think it was the National Defense Authorization Act. Okay. It was one of the must-pass type omnibuses that they've relied on a lot, over the years.
That's the last couple of years. That's the only way they legislate. Yeah, it was pretty bad. Yeah,
right.
I mean,
which is fair criticism in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean that's not. I mean, I'm not downplaying the issue, but that's not going to, like your point. I don't think that's going to move a lot of votes inside in the caucus.
Maybe in the public, maybe people watch Congress watchers or activists might not like how this stuff gets done, but in the caucus itself, senators, I don't think are going to be upset with Thune.
I don't think so at all. And I will say this about Thune: he comes from, look where he comes from. Small state with a strong, hunting tradition. He hunts. I think, I think that's, and Barrasso too, the same thing, coming from Wyoming, and then Tom Cotton from Arkansas. I mean, these are, deep red states. They have hunting traditions. They have, gun rights traditions. I mean, I think, I can't imagine the level of gun ownership in South Dakota it's probably pretty high.
The rate,
I would think for hunting, for hunting purposes, I mean, like guys out there hunting deer, pheasant, everything. I mean, I think, and he does it, and he does every year. I know Thune hunts. So, I mean, of course,
the hunting thing doesn't always lead to.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. But
Tim Walz is a big hunter too.
I do think he's grown up in a culture, a gun owner culture. Right.
Yes,
and I think that's, and I think
the whole leadership.
The whole leadership, and I think that 1,000%. I think that is reflected right now in why his position, right?
Yeah, but that does make me wonder, though. We've kind of gone through here and some of the record differences between Thune and the other options. Do you really, at the end of the day, I don't know that he's going to govern any differently than John Cornyn or Rick Scott would have on this particular issue, maybe on other things. But
especially with Trump in the White House, there's not, and you and I were discussing a little bit, I can't imagine anything moving through this Congress, through a Republican House and a Republican Senate with Trump in the White House, who's campaigned very strongly on this issue, on gun rights issues, Second Amendment issue, his position saying do anything that they would really like,
I will say, with
broadly speaking, I mean, there might
Donald
be
Trump. Maybe we'll see what Republican senators are willing to, how far along they're willing to go with him on everything. Just in some of these controversial nominations he's already made, we might see some sort of showdown. But he does have quite a lot of influence over his own party in Congress. I would say that's pretty fair. And if he ever did decide to push for something like a red flag law, like he did after Parkland briefly,
he would have to. Yeah, right. Well, remember he had that exchange with Dianne Feinstein. I mean, Trump again. Trump, I'm not sure Trump is a gun owner. I'm not sure he definitely
was. He had to turn at one point after he got convicted. I don't know what's going to happen with all that stuff.
But a native New Yorker, not coming from a gun owner culture, I can't imagine that Thune and Speaker Mike Johnson, I can't imagine them moving anything that would be, that would be that gun owners that gun rights groups would oppose. Even if Trump said it, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think even Trump could say something and then he'd just get a huge pushback from the Hill and they'd be like, whoa, we're not, I'm surprised they were not going there. There's one,
And to be fair, during the Parkland conversations he had, Republicans didn't have full control of Congress at that point, right?
No.
So
I don't believe were they
I think it's 2019, right? So Democratic control of both houses at that point, right?
No, in 2019 they still had the House. They had one House, but they didn't. The Democrats had the House. They didn't have the Republicans still had the Senate, right? Because they didn't get the Senate. The Democrats didn't get the Senate.
Yes,
in 2020.
they picked up three seats in 2020. So,
right, they won the Georgia specials and everything. Right, yeah,
right, yeah. So, no, that makes sense. So, but there was still. Congress was split at that point, and there was some possibility of trying to work out some deal.
Right.
It ultimately fell apart because of the impeachment, the first impeachment.
Right.
And then which also kind of
Trump backed away from. He makes the comment on camera with Feinstein, and then by the next day he's backing away. Clearly there were White House staff and clearly from the Hill there was like whoa, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Right.
There was definitely so I don't know. It's unlikely. Let's say that, right?
I would say
very unlikely.
Very unlikely. Right. Yeah.
There are some moments where he sometimes wavers on this stuff, but forgetting the potential for gun control or some sort of new gun restrictions. The potential for pro-gun legislation seems equally rough.
Yeah. I mean, the Democrats can block anything in the Senate. They have enough votes. As long as the filibuster is still there, none of that will move. They have 47 votes. All they need is 40. There's very little chance. I mean, you might even see some Democrats who would vote for, something. I mean, it depends on what it was. But you lose guys like Tester, okay? You lose. John Tester is gone to Montana. So, I think there's, you do have John Ossoff in Georgia is up this cycle. I mean, you could potentially see some Democrats vote, but very, very unlikely in my that if you. The thing is if now. Since the lines become so much sharper and everything has become so much more polarized and grows ever more polarized, like I don't see any way that, a Chuck Schumer would sign off on anything like that. There's just no way he would do that.
Because I will say Thune got 58 votes at one point on a national reciprocity bill.
Right.
Back, I think it was during the Obama administration, but nothing like that. Even 58 seems like a pipe dream today, right? On any sort of gun, pro-gun.
Yeah, but also 58 is also, you always have to be 60. Careful. It's not 60. Exactly. Yeah. It's not 60. And guys, senators knowing it's not 60, maybe I get a free vote. Depends on what it is, where it is, what it happens, It's one thing being 58. It's another thing being the 60th, right? So, it depends. It all depends on the situation. And that's what I kind of try to teach like younger reporters. Like you always, even if they vote for something, doesn't mean they're really for it. When it comes down, 58 ain't 60. If you're going to be the 60 and it's going to pass, then that's a whole different thing. So yeah,
absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point.
I think there's very little chance that we see any real significant gun legislation in this next Congress.
And I think that point this is a little bit off topic, but to me that's why you never got a cloture vote on the assault weapons ban in the Senate back what was it 2 years ago,
right?
Because I don't think they had 50 votes for that at the time.
So it's better to run on it. Better to
some of
run
those people
on
on record.
Yeah, exactly. Just, better to put it out there and let people who want to run on it, and people who don't want to run on it, don't want to. I mean, remember the Duddleback nomination? How long did it take to get that straightened out? What was Tester going to do on it? What was Joe Manchin going to do on it? And that took forever. So, those are I think this is, to me right now, the way the focus is going to be much more economic and economics, immigration, taxes in the front end. And and then maybe we see something, depending on what happens, maybe, if crime if crime continues to
decline,
go down. I mean, it kind of relieves the pressure on Congress to take any action on this. So, but we'll see what Trump does, what crime initiatives he launches, So,
Right. So speaking of, I guess you brought up the nomination there. You brought up the ATF director, Dettelbach. Yeah. What, what do you see on that front? It seems if they end up with 53, which is what it looks like. I mean, technically Pennsylvania is
not called yet.
Ranges within margins. There's going to be a recount, and we don't know for sure who's going to win that. The Republican is ahead there, though.
Yeah, but they're not going to they're not going to swing 30,000 votes or whatever.
Probably not. Although they haven't counted all the votes yet. So we'll see exactly what.
At the current rate, it's 30,000. Right. And currently,
I think the number like 24.
If the number held right. I mean, if it was 500 votes or even 1,000 votes, you can see that. But when you're getting in the tens of thousands, it's hard to see it being overturned.
Right. Yeah, it's very rare that recounts actually result in the race change.
I remember Harry Reid doing a recount. It was 424 votes, and he won. So I mean, even that small number. Yeah.
But we'll see. But 53, 52 is not a huge difference. It matters for nominations, though, right?
Depends on the nominee, right? It depends on the nominee, and it depends on it depends on who he or she is and what the post is, right? So I mean, it's all 53.
Well, so ATF. Trump says he's going to fire Biden's ATF director, Dettelbach.
Day one, right? He says he's going to fire him day one, I think.
Yeah. He said that. He specifically said the ATF director would fire him. So I assume that means there'll be an opportunity to appoint somebody else. I don't know if he will or not. He tried the first time around and failed. Right. What are the odds this time?
It depends on who the nominee is. It depends. I think it depends on what are they going to do with ATF funding? What is his intention there? I think that will be a challenge for Democrats to see, I would have if they're going to cut government funding and they're talking about it, I would see somebody like ATF being really, I think that's a place where you would see Republicans look to make some big cuts,
Yeah. But Biden has kind of, first off, by nominating Chipman, who was a spokesperson for a literal gun control group at the time, nominating him to be ATF director, even though that failed. And even following up with Dettelbach, who had previously run as a Democrat for Attorney General in Ohio and taken specific positions on gun policy. Do you think he's opened up the opportunity to further politicize the agency?
Absolutely. Instead of having like a career ATF staffer who they nominate somebody who's seen by both sides as credible, somebody who's put their life. No, absolutely. I think they have. I think Trump could nominate anybody he wants. I mean, I think at this point, can he get the votes for it? I mean, you still do have. There are, you do have Susan Collins, who's up this cycle. You do have, Lisa Murkowski. I think there's people like that who have some concerns, but, on some of these Trump nominees. But, Murkowski comes from, a very rural state, where there's, probably a different approach to gun issues than there are, in mainland 48, Maine also, gun, a lot of hunting, a lot of gun owners in Maine, high percentage, I would think, probably gun owners. So, we have to see, could he pick up a guy like Ossoff or something, depending on who the nominee is, he could pick up. There are Democrats he could pick up on something
Right.
like that.
Well, I mean, I would think if he went back to the traditional law enforcement guy route, he probably could get a lot of.
I would think he would
maybe
be able
even
to
unanimous.
Right. I think.
But,
nothing. Is,
maybe not unanimous because there's going to be Democrats
but he
who probably
could
vote
get
against other things.
75 votes or something.
Yeah. But if
Right.
he goes the route that Biden went and he tries to do, I don't know, a
Political-
pro-gun academic or
right.
somebody who's got political history, or even a lobbyist, that feels like maybe he could still get him through, right?
I mean, it again
depends.
depends on the person, depends on the history, depends on what they've said or their issues. I mean, you can't just say it, but I mean, you would think that unless there's major objections, unless there's some scandal, or unless there's something really that would raise real problems for them. I mean, unless it hurts them politically at some point, I don't see why they wouldn't be able to do that. I mean, you would think the bias would be he's more likely than not to get it. He would start with, say, 45 votes or something, and then, the White House might have to work a little bit on getting another 5,
Yeah.
So remember, they only have to get 50.
Right.
Because Vance can always do a tiebreaker,
because they can lose 3 Republicans.
Yeah, and if somebody
all
may
the
not,
Democrats.
and somebody may not vote no, they just may not vote. There's, what do we have? Dettelbach's nomination, they have 6 no votes. I went back and looked at it because it was 48-46, but there were 6 senators didn't vote. So, we could see something like that again.
And Chipman never got to a vote, right?
He never got to the vote because Manchin wouldn't do it, right? Yeah.
Manchin and King. And
right.
There's probably, my guess is probably a collection of them who didn't want to do it. And then
exactly. And then
King's
Manchin and
the
King
one
were the
who
ones that go public, and then it's that. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
That's how it usually works. But
Exactly.
I mean, I guess these early, these bigger nominations are probably going to be your best indicator of how things might go, right? The Gates and
Well, see, I mean, they're like
Gabbard
Gates, of course,
RFK.
that's a huge impact on gun policy, who's Attorney General, right?
Right.
Like Gates right now, I would say, to me, right here, sitting today, I would think more likely than not that he's not confirmed. I just think there's a lot, I think there's a lot of people, his record is so...
I mean,
and then he's just an unpopular, unpleasant human being, And
even among Republicans, they don't like
he's
him
going
very
after
much.
Republicans. He's fought with everybody, and listen, Gates made his own bed here, So
I do. One thing I wonder.
I would think that right now, if they could get away with it, 20 Republicans would vote against him in the Senate. They just went. I just think that what does Trump want to do? Does Trump want to go to the mat for Gates, so to speak? Is that really where you want to go? You're going to have issues with Tulsi Gabbard. You're going to have issues with, he's talking about Larry Kudlow for Treasury. He's going to have issues in other places. Is this really where you want to spend all your time?
I do wonder, it makes me wonder about, with these early picks, with some of the really unpopular ones, and there's 4 pretty controversial ones already now, that feel like they're going to be hard to get through. Although, to me, I kind of never underestimate how willing Republicans are to do what Trump wants at this point, especially coming off of him winning the popular vote. Even if the election overall, the Republicans outside of Trump didn't perform that great, right?
I mean, they did. Listen, they
wasn't
picked up
bad.
the Senate. They had a good night in the Senate, not a blockbuster, but they knocked off.
But they lost all the
Tester, and they knocked off Brown.
They did, but those guys were both in.
Casey, that was a huge deal,
Yeah,
they kept the House, which was, to me, after watching the House the last 2 years, still surprised about that. Forget about your politics. The House just sucked.
I just kind of always assume that the House will go with the way the president goes.
It did, but it was only 4 seats, right? So I was like, well, you could have Trump win and you could have a Democratic House. So people would be like, these guys are just terrible, But Trump was, Trump, everywhere he outperformed, his expectations. Once again, the polls underestimated his popularity by a couple of points, which I kept warning people about. I kept telling other reporters, don't worry about the polls. Add 1 to 3 points for Trump because they are going to. It wasn't as bad as 2020 or even 2016, but it was still I think I saw an analysis. It was 2.7 points in the wrong way against Trump. So, I mean,
well, I think he was still within the at least the popular vote is still basically.
Right. And he didn't have technically. He doesn't have a majority. He's at 49.7 something. So,
and they haven't counted all the votes yet. So
even now, it's still he could end up with a majority, but he's going to win.
I just mean if you look at they knocked off the incumbents in the deeper red states, which is still an accomplishment, right? Knocking off an incumbent. In the Senate
Casey. Casey's 18 years. Casey.
Yeah.
He.
But they all pretty well underperformed Trump himself. Is the only thing I mean.
Look at Eric Hovde in Wisconsin. Look at Mike Rogers in Michigan. Trump's winning both those states. They didn't win.
Right.
So
it's just one of those things where it was a very good night for Donald Trump.
It was a very good night for Trump.
But it was a good night for Republicans.
Right.
But it wasn't like.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't 2008 when Democrats just blew out.
Right.
Everything. Right. It was.
Yeah. But either way, Trump's performance, winning again, it makes me think. Republicans are less likely to buck him. Maybe.
No question. Johnson will be speaker, and the only way Johnson will be speaker is Donald Trump wants him to be speaker, because otherwise. There are guys in his conference who would vote against him.
Well, who knows how long he'll be speaker?
Who knows how long, but he's going to win that.
It's going to be the same. It looks like it'll be the exact same margin again, right? 220 is what I think the decision desk is guessing.
Yeah, it's going to be 220 with Gates gone for now. He's going to start at 220. He will, but Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tom Massey would not vote for Mike Johnson unless Donald Trump tells them to, and he will, and they will, right?
I just mean so there's reason to think that senators might not go against Trump on any of these nominations.
If it's not an outlandish pick, like Gates is outlandish.
It is but might still go for it.
I have a very hard time seeing Gates.
Well, you know the Senate a lot better than I do, so I definitely trust you.
Pete Hegseth, I think he will be confirmed. Now, here's a guy. He's a war hero. The guy has 2 Bronze Stars. This is but he has no managerial experience to run an organization like the Pentagon, one of the most complex, maybe the most complex organization on the planet. But I think he'll get confirmed. Right. I think Tulsi Gabbard will get confirmed. I do think Gates is the one they'll. And I think
that's interesting.
I think
this is what I mean. Because my thought is just maybe they'll all get confirmed because Republicans will just do what Donald Trump wants. There are reasons to think that they will. Or if they really are enough Republicans to say no to some of these votes, it kind of feels like maybe picking some of these wilder nominees might accelerate Trump's status as a lame duck because he can't run again. I know he will.
He's got 2 years where he can do anything.
He's talked about
2 years he'll have the House and the Senate. Well, unless something dramatically happens in the House, 2 years he'll have the House.
Is it too simplistic to say, if he doesn't get these wilder nominees that he's pushed to?
I think he's got really the window is into 2026, and how does he perform? What does he get through? How does the rest of the administration perform? What's the state of the economy? If he passes a major tax cut bill and he does something on immigration and he delivers on those 2 issues, his 2 key issues, why he got elected, then I think that, they'll follow. I do think something like Gates, they don't want to vote on it. So they're trying to, they'll go to him and say, withdraw all this. But listen, remember, even Obama had, here's Obama making this, huge historic election in 2009. He had to withdraw people. He tried to push Tom Daschle in, couldn't get Daschle through. This happens. This happens to presidents, there's always going to be a nominee or 2 who's controversial. I think the Gates was a pick that just shocked these guys.
Yeah. Well, here's another, speaking of picks and nominations, the area that, whether Trump descends into lame duck status early or not, I would imagine that a lot of his judicial picks are probably going to be something he can do even through 2028, because just looking at the map for 2026, it's not super favorable to Democrats in the Senate.
No, it's not. mean, I think Ossoff has a real problem if he looked at the election that just happened in Georgia.
Sure.
And Biden's doing nominations this week. They're doing judicial nominations this week. They're going to do judicial nominations next week. I mean,
right. In a
Biden's
50-50 split,
the
too,
lamest of lame duck presidents, and they're going to do it right through. I think the judicial nominations, it's a different world on that now. As long as they get through the Judiciary Committee and they've gotten vetted, I think that these guys have no problem voting for them. Supreme Court is different. I'm not talking about Supreme Court nominating. That's a different caliber. But if you're talking about appeals court and district court judges, which are hugely important, I think both sides do it. They tee up their people and they put them through. And as long as you got 50 votes in the vice president, you can do it.
Right. And that you'd expect that to continue.
Absolutely. I will expect that for the 4 years that Donald Trump is president.
And that's an area where he probably is going to have the most significant impact on gun policy, right? You'd expect.
I would think so. And he could have one or two Supreme Court nominations. I mean, depending, what does Clarence Thomas do? What does Sonia Sotomayor do? I mean, those have been huge. Dave has been impactful on gun policy as anything that, has happened legislatively.
Oh, yeah. And they're appointed for life.
And they're appointed for life, right?
It outlives anything he's going to do on, executive actions or whatnot.
Exactly, because the next president could be Democrat and could reverse it, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And so going back to legislation quickly, though, you mentioned the budget aspect, like maybe they'll cut the ATF's budget. And the reason that that's possible, but something like passing national reciprocity is not possible is because of reconciliation, right?
Reconciliation is one part. You can't do reconciliation is very complex. And so reconciliation protects legislation from filibuster, but it has to have a budgetary impact,
right,
or it doesn't keep the so if it's not under reconciliation, you have to have 60 votes to get over a filibuster. Right. And if it falls out of it, it's a very, very complex formula. The Senate parliamentarian looks at it's very complex. For instance, the Democrats tried to raise the minimum wage via reconciliation, and the parliamentarian ruled it wasn't a majority vote. It had to be at 60, and it failed. So it's a very, very complex. And I remember Bernie Sanders went crazy over it, but he couldn't protect it. It didn't have the reconciliation protection. So now the budget issue for ATF is not necessarily is something that could get in reconciliation. They don't
really?
Right. They don't. It has to have a budgetary impact. It doesn't mean you can't make policy. Democrats really stretched the rules on reconciliation. They really stretched how far it could went when they passed the Inflation Reduction Act. You end up doing EV funding and some energy policy through it because they were able to say it has a budgetary impact. It has to go get a score by the Congressional Budget Office. There has to be significant budgetary impact. And then the parliamentarian looks at it and rules and says, we can do it at majority or we can do it at 60 votes. So it's very complex on that.
So what kind of things could Republicans do with reconciliation that could affect gun policy? One thing that's been suggested, for instance, is using it to amend the National Firearms Act, because the National Firearms Act is technically a tax law that puts a tax on certain kinds of firearms. Specifically, one that gets the most attention is suppressors and silencers, where the idea is the way the NFA works is you have to pay a tax when you go to buy a suppressor, and then you register that you've paid the tax, and that's what the law does. But it's sort of in the budgetary space. Like, what do you see being able to go through that?
That's really interesting. Possibly, I don't know. I would have to say it would have to be a significant.
I haven't seen anyone on the Hill suggest this.
I think I forget. Like, I've looked at the revenue off the silencer tax. I think it's not the order of like a couple $1 million. I don't think it's a huge.
It's probably about right. There's only a couple million registered suppressors in the country.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the tax stamp is $200.
It's a $200 tax, I believe, something like that. Yeah. So I don't know how the parliamentarian would rule on that, but it is something that these people get pretty creative on this stuff. I can't tell you how hyper complex the parliamentarians' rulings are on reconciliation. I swear it's some kind of art form, because they go in and members and senators will meet with the staff will meet and the members will meet and they'll have long conversations, and then they'll have talk about it, and there's precedent of 200 years they look at it, and then they has to get analyzed by the Congressional Budget Office. So it's really a black box. It's really.
And I've never seen anyone try to do this through reconciliation or suggest doing it through reconciliation. So it may not be possible. They usually just try to do it through
because again, the Democrats really pushed the Republicans looked at what the Democrats did with the Inflation Reduction Act and said, we need to get creative. They're doing this. So again, this is something that they could be attempted. All they could do is parliamentarian could say no if they can find a majority to vote for it.
Right. Yeah, that was big under Obamacare too, right? That was a lot of parliamentarian reconciliation stuff going on with that.
Oh my gosh, they really, like, from when I started 30 years ago, reconciliation has been stretched a long way. But then they have 30 more years of precedent on it. So
yeah. Well, all right. So that we'll keep an eye on that.
Look at it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's successful. I have no idea how the parliamentarian would rule.
Is there anything else through budget reconciliation that you could see doing some sort of gun policy stuff? Or any suggestions you've heard?
No, not really. I mean, I think right now they're so focused on taxes, the Trump tax cuts. That's the big thing, and that's
because those expire soon.
Yeah, they expire at the end of 2025, and the amount of money is huge. I will say this though: everybody's talking about reconciliation comes early in the next Congress. I'm not sure it comes that early because of the nomination of Gates, who's resigned from Congress now, and he wants to take Elise Stefanik of New York for the UN, and he's talking to Michael Waltz of Florida as National Security Advisor. They're going to have a really thin majority. They could be down to 218 seats. Like, they could be like a 1-vote majority. So there's talk now, reconciliation may take a couple months. I think that is a window where people are like, okay, well, we got a little time here. Let's see what we can do. We could come up with. I don't see a huge, on broader gun policy. I can't see how it would fall under reconciliation. But like with the silencer, I think that's something that people will try and get creative on. But I have a hard time. What's the budgetary impact? It has to have a direct budgetary, and it has to be mainly a budgetary impact. It can't be just an ancillary impact. So I can't see how they would do that necessarily.
So I think outside of judge appointments, judicial appointments, and like agency appointments, there's probably not a huge potential for Congress to do much on guns.
I think they'll try. Again, we've talked about Richard Hudson. I think he'll try with his, silencer bill. I think we may see people try with concealed carry reciprocity. I don't think it will go anywhere. I do think that the executive action will be the biggest issue here. How they enforce law. I mean, the ghost gun case, I think, is a big deal because it has been argued by the Supreme Court, but the Trump administration may change it, which happened in 2017. There were several cases where the Trump administration succeeded Obama, and they changed their position on cases before the Supreme Court. I think we could very well see a change there, and that's a huge deal. So
there's also the Congressional Review Act, right?
Yep, CRA. They could do that.
I don't think any of the gun rules would apply because they're not that new.
I don't believe that. I do think, again, the White House Office of Gun Violence and Prevention, I think that will go away. I mean, I just don't see legislation. But I do think it's as important on the tone that the Trump will set and the Republican Congress will set on gun rights issues, on gun policy, will be completely dramatically different. You talked about assault weapons ban. That's not going anywhere. The universal background checks is not happening. Okay, they weren't going to pass anyway, and there's no chance for at least the next 4 years you'll see any movement on that. But how they pick cases, how they criminal cases, where they enforce it, what they do on it, I think that's all going to be who's Attorney General, who's running ATF, I think those are huge differences.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess that's where Congress probably has the the
Yeah,
most
but
impact is
Congress
on
can
those
influence
nominees.
that executive action. Remember, they can have hearings, they can write letters, they can bring this issue, they can raise the issue for Trump, they can raise the issue J.D. Vance, they can raise the issue for the Justice Department. It's a whole Congress not necessarily has to legislate to influence policy at that level. If Trump thinks or Vance thinks or the White House staff thinks, well, listen, I got a letter from 150 Republicans in Congress on an issue. That's a big deal. That impacts things.
Yeah. Good point. All right. Well, hey, we appreciate you taking the time to come on the show and give us your expert insight into what's going on in the Hill. Why don't you tell people a little bit more about Punchbowl and where they can find more of your reporting?
Again, and thank you for having me on. It's really great to talk to you. It's great to talk to an issue expert. You are the issue expert on this issue. So is one issue expert to another, big fan of, I'm a subscriber to Reload, so everybody should be.
Hey, there we go. We got a nice little ad too.
Very well. Seriously, I am.
Same here.
I like policy. I like issue experts. I've been doing this for a long time, and I respect the people who know what they're talking about. All right, so Punchbowl News is online, punchbowl.news. You can sign up for the AM. It comes out 5 a.m. every morning, 5 days a week. That is free, and then there's a subscription. You can buy a subscription for the rest of Punchbowl for the midday and PM editions if you want to get in more. I think it's $300 or $350 a year. And then we have some specialty publications. You can see it online. So punchbowl.news, check it out. We'd always, and you can always reach out to me. I'm John at punchbowl.news. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you have, you hear it, if you got tips on what's happening, and it has to do with Congress, I'm a great, I'm always listening. I'm always looking for news. So,
yeah. I highly recommend Punchbowl. If you actually want to know what's going on in DC, I don't care what your point of view is, what party you come from, read Punchbowl and you'll have an understanding of what's actually happening in the Capitol. So I highly recommend checking them out.
Thank you.
But, hey, thank you so much again.
See you again.
I really appreciate you doing this. We'll have to have you back on and once things start moving in Congress.
Love it. Yeah, January, anytime in January, things start popping. We'll have lots to talk about, I'm sure.
Yeah, it'll be perfect. All right. That's all we've got for this week. We will see you guys again real soon.